All right, here's the answer key for practice with commas. Number one, we are listing items. The tricky thing here is that peas and carrots kind of go together. That's like considered one thing. So instead of having a comma after peas or after the and, we're going to list, we're having peas and carrots, comma, roast beef, comma, and cake for dinner. So that would be rule number one, items in a list. Number two would be rule 8 or 9 because we have some extra information about Mr. Morton. So we're going to say Mr. Morton, comma, my English teacher, comma, says we have to learn how to use commas. Okay, so guys, remember the trick here is if you can take out what's inside the commas, if we take out my English teacher, the sentence does still make sense. Okay, so that would be rule, we could say 8 or 9, because remember, they're just very similar. Number 3, he says, remember, Bob, use commas before and after you address someone directly. So here we have a couple rules happening. We have rule 6, right, about direct quotation. So when we're going into or out of a direct quote, we use a comma. But within that direct quote, we're also directly addressing Bob within the middle of that sentence. So, comma, Bob, comma. So we have rule number 6 here, but we also have rule number 3 for direct address. Number 4, Kelly said, did you do the homework, Angie? So same issue here. We're leading into a quote. So Kelly said, comma, and notice that's before the quotation mark. Did you do the homework, Angie? So since we're directly addressing Angie, we have a comma before her name because we're addressing her at the end of the sentence. So this, again, we have rule number 6 and rule number 3. Number 5, the teachers at Erickson Academy work hard to teach the students. There is no comma in this sentence. That is correct as is, so we'll just say NC. Alex painted the fence white, blue, and green. Well, this is just rule number 1. We're listing the colors he used. He used white, comma, blue, comma, and green. Remember, we always need, when we're using rule number 1, we do want to include that final comma before the and. So remember, the rule of thumb is that it's always one fewer commas than the number of items being listed. So if we're listing 3 things, 2 commas. If we're listing 100 things, 99 commas. Okay. Number 7, we waited at the bus stop on Central Park Avenue after school. This one has no commas, okay? However, if we had flipped the order around and said after school, comma, we waited at the bus stop. In that case, we would if we were starting with that introductory phrase, but since we're ending with that phrase there, that's why we don't need it. So that goes along with rule number 7, if you want to look up more info about that. My mom, who is a nurse, cares for the sick, injured, and disabled. So we have 2 issues happening here, and I see, oh my gosh, whoever made this worksheet forgot a period. It was not me, by the way. So we have extra information about my mom, comma, who is a nurse, comma. So that would be rule 9, right? And if we take that out, our sentence still makes sense. But then we also have a list, sick, comma, injured, comma, and disabled. So that part would be rule 1. Number 9, one famous basketball player, comma, Michael Jordan, comma, won 5 MVP awards. So we are re-identifying that famous basketball player. That's rule number 8 for positive phrases. Number 10, we're just coming out of a quote, so don't go there, comma, said Formica. It's an interesting name. Number 11, Robert Louis Stevenson was a Scottish writer of novels, poems, and essays. So this is simple. We're just listing the things he wrote, novels, comma, poems, comma, and essays. So rule number 1, I forgot to say this was rule 6. I was so distracted by that name. Number 12, we're directly addressing Mr. Bond, and we're doing that in the middle of the sentence. So now, comma, Mr. Bond, comma, we will saw you in half. So that's direct address, rule number 3. 13, Takita said, comma, stop talking to me, Renisha. So we have 2 things happening here. We're leading into a quote, so that part's rule 6, but we're also directly addressing Renisha, so that's rule 3. Number number 14, Chicago, the largest city in the Midwest, is the home of the skyscraper blues and deep dish pizza. So we have a couple things happening. Number one, we have extra unnecessary information about Chicago. So that part is rule number 9. But then we're listing the things that Chicago is home to. So we're listing the skyscraper. It's also the home of the blues and deep dish pizza. So that part is rule number 1. So we have rule 9 here and rule 1 at the end. No, Jackie, I don't want to go with Mark. So it's an introductory word with no, but I'm also directly addressing Jackie. Right? So I guess technically we could say rule 7 for introductory word, but then also direct address, rule 3. Alice said, but they keep picking on me, Rudy. So we have 2 rules happening. Rule 6, right, leading into a quote, and then directly addressing Rudy is rule 3. Number 17, Emilio, my next door neighbor. So we're renaming, so that's rule number 8. We can take that out and the sentence still makes sense. Anyway, Emilio, comma, my next door neighbor, comma, has 2 daughters, a son, and a puppy. So then we're also listening, 2 daughters, comma, a son, comma, and a puppy. So we have rule 8 for the positive phrase and then rule 1 for the list. That Tuesday, which also happens to be my birthday, so rule number 9, extra information, is the only day we can take the test. Rule 9. Brett Favre, the quarterback for the team, is having a bad week, so we're renaming, re-identifying Brett Favre, right? If we took that phrase out, our sentence would still make sense, and that's rule number 8.